Just Stop Oil are done. They announced yesterday that they are hanging up the high vis and will no longer be protesting. Why? Well, according to them, job done. 3 years after bursting onto the scene in a blaze of orange at the end of April, we will be hanging up the high vis. Just Stop Oil's initial demand to end new oil and gas is now government policy, making us one of the most successful civil resistance campaigns in recent history. We've kept over 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and the courts have ruled new oil and gas licenses unlawful. So, it is the end of soup on Van Gogh, cornstarch on Stonehenge, and slow marching in the streets. But it is not the end of trials, of tagging and surveillance, fines, probation, and years in prison. So just like that, they're finished, which, is surprising to me because given that this Labour government are notorious liars, given that they've taken money from the fossil fuel industry, hanging up the high vis is obviously premature. Why not say, look, we're on standby. We're going to stop protesting temporarily, but we're ready to protest if they break their promises, which they probably will. Now, look, I support the message of JSO, right? But this seems quite dumb, right? Especially after this post just 1 day later. Yesterday, 10 Downing Street issued a response to our announcements. They said all oil and gas has a future for decades to come. Their statement demonstrates that our politicians have no grasp on reality, or if they do, they have decided to knowingly kill billions. So I feel like this has literally made their announcement completely pointless. Now, they also claimed that it was them who kept 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground, which is actually disputed. Just Stop Oil are claiming credit for our work. Bad form. Now, the work of Sarah Finch and the Weald Action Group took their case to the Supreme Court regarding Horse Hill that led to the court's ruling that new oil and gas is unlawful. So it seems that the government didn't change their mind because of JSO. The courts made a ruling because of the hard work and activism from the Weald Action Group. And the Supreme Court ruling, which they won. That's what changed everything. Now, we also have a Turn Left exclusive statement from Lorraine Inglis, co-founder of Weald Action Group.
We were very shocked at Just Stop Oil's statement yesterday with the claims that they made. Weald Action Group is a network of local community grassroots groups fighting onshore oil and gas in the southeast, with some local groups formed as far back as 2012. After a 5-year court battle, in June 2024, we won a historic landmark victory in the Supreme Court with the Finch judgment that stipulates Scope 3 emissions are to be included in environmental impact assessments for fossil fuel development. This has halted all fossil fuel development in its tracks. At present, the oil site at Horse Hill, the planned new coal mine in Cumbria, 2 new gas wells at Biscathorpe and Saltfleetby in Lincolnshire, and the offshore Rosebank and Jackdaw oil and gas sites are all halted, among other projects. As a result of our win, the government has been forced to rethink its approach to permitting new oil and gas fields. A consultation on this closed in January. So it was very disheartening to see Just Stop Oil making the claim that they had kept over 4.4 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and the courts have ruled new oil and gas licences unlawful. We feel they are taking credit for our work. They're also taking credit for the Labour government's commitment to stop new oil and gas licences. But this is greenwashing from the Labour government. As the UK are already carved up with enough licences, there is no need for a new round. We acknowledge there are 16 prisoners in jail for fighting for Just Stop Oil to keep oil in the ground. But these are very big claims that they are making. There are many of us volunteering within the climate movement, and we want to ensure all our grassroots campaigners are honoured and respected for what we have achieved. We asked Just Stop Oil to retract the statement, but they refused, say that it was already out there. It saddens me to have to make this statement, as we are all in it together in the climate movement.
Interesting stuff there. Sarah, what do you make of this announcement? Is it because they think they won? Or do you think this might have to do with the fact that a lot of JSO activists are in jail and they, physically cannot operate?
I mean, it's probably a bit of both. I think this isn't a mission accomplished moment. The claim that I think that Just Stop Oil has won, I think is quite premature. And I think it's politically dangerous as well to a certain degree. If this is about activists being burnt out, imprisoned or under state surveillance, and there's no doubt that the British state has cracked down pretty hard on them, then just say that. But I think own that reality, don't package retreat as victory. And I think that's the thing that's unsettling me slightly. I think to declare that the job is done when the government immediately responds by reaffirming its commitment to decades of more oil and gas, I think is like a bit of a side-eye moment. I feel like they will probably dedicate more money towards oil and gas. So I don't see how this is a victory in any way, shape, or form, but it tells us everything we need to know. They rendered that Just Stop Oil's response is irrelevant. And worse, I think it risks demobilizing people. People have a right to speak out about the things that they see as atrocious. And I think that the investments that we are making in oil and gas are atrocious.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. So it came one day after the government were like, no, we love oil and gas. So I feel like that's irrelevant. And you're right that it demobilizes people because it's like, okay, so I guess we're going to give up now, or we're just going to finish. And like, again, the Labour Party, this Labour government are like unbelievably dishonest. They're one of the worst liars we've ever had. I mean, Keir Starmer's a pathological liar, right? And I just think, why do this? Because they're obviously going to break it. But also, you know, look, I was having a discussion with one of our contributors who was sort of trying to give a bit of nuance here and was saying, look, their goal was to stop new oil and gas licenses. That's been done. So I guess it is job done. But I'm thinking, but surely they're called Just Stop Oil, right? They care about the climate. Why would you stop at okay, they've stopped new oil and gas licenses. That's not job done because we're still using oil. Surely you would go on to something else. It doesn't make any sense to me. And you're absolutely right as well that why don't they just come out, if this is the case, by the way, we are just speculating, but if it is the case that they just don't have enough activists, fucking say that, because I tell you what, that's way more powerful. If you say, oh, by the way, you know, job done now, guys, we've done all right here. This is it. Or if they say, look, we really want to hold the government to account, but this authoritarian government is locking up our activists. Now, whether you agree with us or not, I think that's really, really bad that the state is clamping down. That's far more of a powerful message. But to sort of say, no, I think we're done now.
Mm. Yeah,
You know, it makes sense for it for
no,
me, please,
agreed.
Sarah, because I'm
I'm
confused.
confused. I think we're both confused. I think we need to be honest. The Labour government, like you said, dishonest. They haven't been able to earn anyone's trust. So I think this is a party that still accepts money from fossil fuel interests and still refuses to commit to public ownership of energy. So I think to step back now on the assumption that Labour will follow through on climate commitments is naive at best and reckless, I think, at worst. So I think it does worry me slightly. And like you said, why not just say, hey, like we're on standby, like ready to protest if they break their promises? And I think that would have been the strategic move. Like standby, I think keeps the infrastructure alive, and it maintains pressure and it preserves the threat of action, which is often as powerful as the action itself. And it would have people thinking, oh yeah, well actually they might come again. I think declaring a full stop rather than a pause sends entirely the wrong message, entirely the wrong signal, both to the public and to the state. Movements that succeed over time are ones that don't declare victory based on the promises of those in power, but they keep mobilized, they stay visible, and crucially, I think they hold the line after legal wins to ensure implementation, to ensure accountability. So I don't know if this is the best way forward.
Let me ask you about JSO then. Obviously, we're all in agreement. We agree their aims. There's been discussion among the left whether they're actually effective. They claim that they kept 4.4 billion barrels worth of oil in the ground or underground. That's probably been, well, that has been disproven, right? It was the World Action Group who got it through the courts. So, in actuality, not to try and be too, not to try and attack JSO too much, right? Because again, I agree with their aims. But have they actually done anything? Like the only thing, well, the main thing, which is stop new oil and gas licenses, can't even be attributed to them. And in fact, it's very possible that they've pissed off more people than they expected. Don't get me wrong, protesting in the street is going to annoy people. Throwing soup on Van Gogh, right, it's going to piss people off. But obviously, the point of protest is, not to be convenient, right? But if you think they actually haven't won any material gains, and maybe all they've done is piss people off, have JSO been more harm than good?
A really good question. I mean, let's just look at the profile of JSO really quickly. Like a lot, I think there is a slight class dynamic there. To be honest, like when I look at JSO's, yeah, when I look at JSO's profile, like they are disproportionately young. working class, and sometimes, like, a lot of the time, marginalized. So I don't know if I think they're doing great work. I do. I do think that it's a little bit difficult, I think, given the time and the climate that we're living in. But I think we do need a level of humility. I think they are doing great. Humility is needed in the climate movement. Not every victory belongs to us. I think sometimes it's others, often quieter, more community rooted activists who do the heavy lifting. And I think of those in the global south particularly, because I don't think that they're voiced at the forefront a lot of the time when it comes to this the climate crisis, when it does need to be at the forefront. And I think we need to acknowledge the moves that they're making, that they are replicating the same logic, but they aren't. I don't know. It's so sticky, and I actually don't even know how to answer it.
Well, they've had this sort of accusation that they're a middle class movement,
In some
and if you
ways.
ask me, I don't care what your class makeup is. If you're fighting against climate change, that's a noble thing. But obviously, you gotta weigh up what you agree with
True.
and how do you get people on
I
side,
guess don't
right?
replicate the logic of liberals, and I think that's the risk that happens in
Possibly, possibly. You know,
Okay.
I think I remember when Extinction Rebellion,
Oh yes.
they put out a statement saying, we're actually, we're not ideological, we're not necessarily against capitalism or for socialism, we just care about the planet. And it was so tone deaf and so liberal because it's like, you absolutely need to make this a class issue. You absolutely need to make this an economic issue. You absolutely need to say, to save the planet needs to end capitalism. And they were sort of backed off that. I think, and I've said this in the past, I think a successful climate movement is when you combine it with economic issues and class, like the Green New Deal movement in the US, right? Which is to say, look, we need to understand climate change is a class thing, right? It's not middle class, pink haired people who are sounding alarm on climate, and actually it affects your economic position, and we need to create good, high quality paid jobs. I think that's the more successful way of doing it. Bring people in. Now, of course, that sounds kind of stupid because at the end of the day, whether it's a class issue or not, climate does affect everyone. It absolutely does. But unfortunately, people don't realize that, I think. So people think of the material. So I think if they make it a holistic movement between climate and class, I think that might be better. But at the end of the day, there's no silver bullet. I could be completely wrong.
I think it's actually.
I don't know what your thoughts on
I
that
think
is.
it's a really, really good point. To be fair, like Just Stop Oil, their campaign is bold and it's worthy of credit. It's visible, it's provocative, and I think that there's credit. We need to give them credit where credit's just due because it does get people talking. But social movements, I think, like you said, aren't measured by how much media they generate. I think they're measured by what they build. And what they sustain and who they empower. So I think if you are pissing a shitload of people off, yeah, you're probably in people's mouths. They're probably going to resent you slightly. So I guess in relation to what you're saying, declaring victory now obviously is very premature, but I think it risks demoralizing supporters as well, who need to be mobilized in a movement that requires all voices to be at the forefront too.
Yeah, I think people conflate when you talk about, there's no such thing as bad press. Yeah, that works when you're in Hollywood
Yeah,
or whatever because you're making money.
true.
It's not the same as politics. Like, you can absolutely have bad press. And I think this idea that, just get yourself out in the media, that's a good thing. No, because you risk the issue that, yes, more people are talking about you, but you've got more haters. Now, if you're a celebrity who just wants to make money, you actually can monetize hate,
Yeah.
right? So people hate you more. They're more motivated to engage with you. That's probably a good thing in terms of making yourself richer. In politics, though, you want to be popular. You want to be liked. So if more and more people talk about you, but they fucking hate you, that's not doing the cause any good.
Absolutely.
This is not me sat here just completely piling on JSO, by the way, because I understand doing these moves is going to annoy people. This is not about that. This is just obviously looking at what's working and what's not working.
Yeah.
But all this kind of feels a bit irrelevant now because they're hanging up the high vis, so it seems. I suspect this isn't going to be the end of them, though. I mean, it can't be because
It won't be.
Keir Starmer isn't going to stick to. I don't think he's going to stick to no new oil and gas
No, agreed.
licenses.
Agreed. The government will
No.
still keep drilling, and they will keep investing in things that are detrimental to the climate. But I think, like, anyone who's a Just Stop Oil supporter, or like anyone who is like wanting change in terms of the climate, I think if you really want a real climate movement, not that Just Stop Oil aren't a real climate movement, but I think if you want to mobilize the masses, I think it has to be a collective and it needs to be rooted in the struggle for justice. And it can't just be against fossil fuels. I think you need to be against the system that sustains these things as well. And I think the best way to do that is to to really garner as much support as you can, because you want to make sure your cause is credible, like you said. So be credible and center everyone's voice in that. And I agree, there is a class element to this that needs to be spoken about.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.